Glad you're with us again, Congressman.
Governor, it's always great to be with you. Thanks a lot for having me back on.
Congressman, it appears that former U.S. Ambassador to the Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, communicated by way of her personal email account with the Democratic congressional staffer concerning a, quote, quite delicate and, quote, time-sensitive matter just a couple of days before the whistleblower complaint happened. How does this square up with what she told Congressman Lee Zeldin under oath last month?
Well, clearly it doesn't add up. And I would add that this ambassador, as much as the media is trying to cover up, she was known throughout Capitol Hill as a hardcore partisan. You know, which is fine. You can be a bureaucrat and be a hardcore partisan. I'm not counting that against her. But when you come in and you've been communicating with Democratic staffers and you're asked specifically twice whether or not you did and you lie about it, I think she's got some real problems ahead, and she's going to have to answer those questions next week.
Attorney Mark Zaid is one of the attorneys representing the intelligence community whistleblower in this impeachment inquiry. Now, it's been revealed that Zaid has passed tweets stating things like that a coup has started and that impeachment will follow ultimately, and then we will get rid of President Trump. This country is strong enough to survive even him and his supporters, and I end the quote. How can this lawyer even be involved in this inquiry any longer?
You know, you have to ask the whistleblower that. It's the whistleblower who decided to hire the lawyer. I was really shocked. This really reminds me of the dirty cops at the FBI, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and others, and all of their text messages about how Trump was going to lose 100 million to 0 to Hillary Clinton, that there were smelly people at Walmart, that they could smell the Trump support at Walmart. That's what these tweets remind me of. So, you know, I don't have any ill will towards the lawyer. He's free to express what he wants, but, you know, the whistleblower probably would want to get somebody different just so you don't have that problem. And, you know, remember the whole issue here with the whistleblower is that we don't know who the whistleblower is. We don't, only the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, the Inspector General, the whistleblower and the whistleblower's lawyer know who this person is. So as of right now, I always say this, we don't even really know if this is a live person or not, this whistleblower. So there's a lot of questions, which is why we're going to have to interview this whistleblower before we get to these public hearings. And we really should have the whistleblower out in a public hearing. That would be the best.
Was there material importance to Ambassador Sondland changing his story and recollection of what took place in the White House Ukraine call?
Well, the media likes to make a big deal about Ambassador Sondland, so let's remember what's going on here. So I think this is important for your audience to understand. There's two common themes that we know of. Number one is that Donald Trump has no use for Ukraine. He thinks they're corrupt. He's upset about the things that they did to him, that high-level officials in Ukraine did to his campaign back in 2016. That's one thing we know for sure. The second thing we know is that there were a bunch of bureaucrats, both in the State Department and at the NSC in the White House, who had a problem, a clear problem, that Donald Trump had set up a separate channel. The president set up a special channel with a special envoy named Kurt Volker to deal with Ukraine issues and have basically went around the normal chain of command. Ambassador Sondland is the EU ambassador. He just agreed to help Ambassador Volker. So he had approval from Secretary Pompeo to help the special envoy to Ukraine, being that the EU ambassador takes in all the European countries, understanding that Ukraine's not even part of the EU. He was just kind of setting up aid, trying to set up a phone call between President Trump and the new Ukrainian president. So the whole idea that Ambassador Sondland would be some genius expert person dealing with Ukrainian issues is really far-fetched. You have the fact that he never actually even, other than just text messaging with Rudy Giuliani, he had only spoke to President Trump a few times. And in all those conversations, Sondland said the same thing over and over again. The president really doesn't want anything to do with Ukraine. The key here is that Sondland did talk directly to the president of the United States, and never once did the president of the United States tell Ambassador Sondland that he was expecting anything in return. That much is clear. And in fact, Ambassador Sondland says repeatedly that the president just didn't want to talk about it ever. So the idea that the phone call actually did occur, Ambassador Sondland was successful in having the phone call occur on July 25th. What he changed his testimony about is about a discussion that he had with a Ukrainian official in September. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that timeline? The whistleblower comes in August. So whatever Sondland did has nothing to do with the whistleblower. And all Sondland is saying is that he knew that there had to be a statement on corruption, which, by the way, that's law that the U.S. Congress passed. We passed that Ukraine had to show progress, that there was no corruption, that they were doing something to root out corruption. Why? Because they've been corrupt since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Now, you mentioned that Democrats and the media are virtually a cult. What did you mean by that?
Well, I don't think, I'm sorry I used the word virtually, because there's no question this has become a cult. So for 3 years, ever since the election, day one, you had people in the media calling for removal and impeachment of the president. We now know that the FBI and a bunch of dirty cops of the Department of Justice were investigating the Trump campaign using our intelligence services. That's how me, as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, got involved in this in the first place. Now, still as the ranking member and the top Republican, I'm still involved with this. Why? Because dirty cops decided to use our special capabilities in this country that we use to keep our citizens safe from foreigners. They use it against a political campaign. Never, ever should have been done. You fast forward as to what that Trump was continued to be under investigation by the FBI and others. We were told that it was just every day, if there wasn't one bombshell, there were 5 bombshells in a day of stories that now were completely a hoax. We now know that most of this was coming from Democratic operatives that were paid by the Clinton campaign or the DNC to throw dirt on this president. That happened and went on, and the media continued to cover it. So you can argue that at that point, it wasn't a cult. But once we began to start having secret meetings in the basement of the Capitol behind armed guards and 2 heavily secured doors where our nation's secrets are kept, at that point, with these secret meetings that then the Democrats would leak out selectively what happened in those meetings, this is where there's no question that this turned into a cult. And then about a couple hundred feet from the armed security guards, you have the media, and the media are the cult followers. They're sycophant cult followers. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no other excuse. They've been in on this from the beginning of the whole Russia hoax, which is now transformed into Ukraine. They're just mad, and they're really sloppy. This is like the cheap knockoff version of the Russia hoax, this whole Ukrainian nonsense.
Congressman, there's a great book by journalist Lee Smith just released entitled The Plot Against the President, the true story of how Congressman Devin Nunes uncovered the biggest political scandal in U.S. history. I wish you'd tell us about the efforts to expose the charade of Russian collusion against the president, because you're really the front and center of this absolutely blockbuster book.
Well, the important thing that's in Lee Smith's book called The Plot Against the President is that he was one of the very few investigative reporters that was actually digging up real and new and hard information. So he followed a lot of this. He broke a lot of news stories with his own investigative reporting. One of the things that he did is he also followed our team. So I think it's key that history be written, because if you look at 3 years of media stories, there's a daily attack on either myself or my team and the Republicans that are on our team that, and the truth was not going to be told until this book. So it's our reflections on what happened along with Lee Smith's investigative reporting. And I will tell you, for someone who is not an expert on the Russia hoax and Russiagate and looking today at what the Department of Justice is looking at in terms of the 8 criminal referrals, there's a lot of new information in this book, and I think Lee Smith did a great job in making it easy to understand, and I think that's why it's doing so well. It was a #1 bestseller on Amazon last week, and even made the Fake News New York Times bestseller list.
Why isn't there outrage or at least some attention given to the Bidens boasting about giving the Ukrainians 6 hours to fire their prosecutors, or else the U.S. doesn't send money?
I think there's two important issues. So there's the issue that you just raised there about the Bidens. So how did the Bidens get into this? How did we ultimately discover that the Bidens were involved in this? It's real simple. It actually is related to the Russia hoax. So if you look at the Steele dossiers, okay, that in Lee Smith's book, he actually shows how Steele didn't even write those dossiers. These were the dossiers, the dirt that the Clintons and the Democratic Party were paying for. A lot of that dirt originates in Ukraine. So Democratic operatives were talking to Ukrainians, digging up dirt, or supposedly, we don't even know if that's true, talking to Ukrainians and feeding that dirt to Fusion GPS that made it into the Steele dossier that ultimately made it into the FBI. So as we were following those tracks and trying to get to the bottom of, hey, are there really Ukrainians? You know, these are Ukrainian officials, you know, who was talking to them? Where did this dirt come from? Why were they saying these things about the Trump campaign? That was what House Republicans were trying to get to the bottom of. At the same time, Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer who's defending him against Bob Mueller, everybody forgets that, Giuliani's also trying to figure out, hey, who are these people that are dirtying up President Trump? Well, a lot of this originated with the Democrats that they had paid for. So clearly, those of us who are interested in getting to the bottom of what happened in the 2016 election, we would want to know about that. So what happened is we started to look at that. Lo and behold, this whole issue with Burisma and Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, getting paid an astronomical amount of money. Some people say it's as much as $85,000 per month. And he got put on this board. And then you match that with now knowing emails that come from the State Department. There's no question that that something is wrong here and there should be an investigation. And look, I don't think it really even matters because it seems to me like Joe Biden's campaign is on fumes and it's probably not going anywhere. But the bottom line is the American people need to know the truth. And that is that President Trump and anybody who wanted to get to the bottom of the 2016 election had to look at Ukraine. And at the same time, once you begin to look at Ukraine and what they did to dirty up the president, you have to look into Hunter Biden and Burisma and the money that the U.S. government was holding out in order to get a prosecutor fired.
With all the political theater and fake news out there, I'm just wondering, where's this all going to land, Congressman? And how will it affect the 2020 presidential elections?
Well, it's hard to say. I think the key here is going to be is the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, Mr. Durham, who's looking at all this information. I think that's really going to be the key because at the end of the day, Robert Mueller didn't tell us what happened in the Russia hoax. And in fact, I don't want to tell people to buy the book again or to look at the book, but in Lee Smith's book, The Plot Against the President, he does a much better job of informing the public than what Mueller spent $35 million doing. So Durham will look at all of this. He will see if any crimes will be broken. I think for sure we'll get a clear picture of who all these cast of characters that are out there that are still, we don't know their connections to the Democrats or to Russians or to Ukrainians or why they were dirtying up the Trump campaign or why the FBI took up this investigation. But Durham is going to get to the bottom of it. And if the IG right now, Horowitz, he has a report that is due to come out at any point. I think that's going to be important information as to how they were able to go, the FBI was able to go to a secret court and get a warrant on the Trump campaign to spy on their communications. That should send a chill through every American's bones, and it's what the House Republicans Intelligence Committee, it's what we uncovered all through 2017 and 18, even though the mainstream media continues to say that the memo that we put out explaining how they had went to the court, used this dirt that the media had run stories on, and they used the media stories in the court that actually just came from the Democrats. So they used circular reporting to support getting the warrant on the Trump campaign. That's really scary stuff. And still to this day, the media continues to falsely claim that somehow the Nunes memo and the Republicans were totally false. It's a conspiracy theory. So we'll just see what Horowitz comes up with, and then we'll see if Durham can make people pay the price for their corruption.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Great to have you back.
Well, thank you so much, Governor. I always enjoy being with you and talking with you.
Now, you can learn more about Congressman Nunes at nunes.house.gov. Follow him on Twitter at Devin Nunes. Be sure to get your copy of journalist Lee Smith's book, The Plot Against the President, the true story of how Congressman Devin Nunes uncovered the biggest political scandal in U.S. history. Powerful book, and it's available wherever books are sold.